In 2013, these incredible moon landing relics were recovered from the bottom of the Atlantic. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to ring the bell for more. On July 16, 1969, a Saturn V rocket blasted off, launching the Apollo 11 mission from Florida's Kennedy Space Station. 4 days later, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first humans to set foot on the moon. An awestruck 5-year-old boy watched the mission on TV, and 44 years later, he was to make an incredible discovery. The launch of Apollo 11 took place in the context of the highly competitive space race between the US and the Soviet Union. The Soviets had put the first man into orbit in 1961, Yuri Gagarin, an achievement that shocked the American public. Subsequently, in that same year, President Kennedy promised to put a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. After Kennedy fired the starting pistol on the moon mission, the Apollo program went through years of development and testing prior to the launch of Apollo 11. When it was finally ready to go, the Apollo 11 spacecraft was to be launched by a 3-section Saturn V rocket. The 138-foot lowermost Saturn V stage, called S1C, hurled the rocket skywards from the launch pad and then disengaged, falling back to Earth. The second stage, the 82-foot S2, thrust the spacecraft into the upper atmosphere before it too was jettisoned, dropping earthwards. But the third, S4B stage, stayed with the craft to power it to the moon. When its purpose had been fulfilled, it ended up in orbit around the sun. The Saturn V 2 stages that were jettisoned landed in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida, and there you would expect they'd remain before gradually rusting away to nothing. But the billionaire founder, chairman, and CEO of online retailer Amazon, Jeff Bezos, had different ideas. Bezos was the awestruck kid we mentioned earlier, glued to the TV as Apollo 11 made its historic moon landing. Some billionaires choose to spend their wealth on sports teams, luxury yachts, or running for president. But Bezos has maintained his boyhood interest in space exploration, and he has the money to indulge his passion. In fact, as well as Bezos' fascination for space travel, he also has a keen interest in underwater exploration. And it was a combination of those two passions that led him to funding and participating in a major exploration mission to find a section of the Saturn V rocket that powered the first moon landing. A little more on that first Saturn V section. It was powered by 5 F1 rocket engines, which provided the combined thrust necessary to lift the towering 363-foot rocket off its launch pad. Bezos himself paid tribute to the technological genius of these engines, describing them on his Bezos Expedition website in 2012 as a modern wonder. The rocket engines were designed by Rocketdyne in the 1950s for the US Air Force. It then decided that it no longer needed so powerful an engine, but they were exactly what NASA wanted for its Apollo missions. Despite their complex engineering and design, though, they were single-use components. The engines fired for just 168 seconds, in fact, taking the Saturn V to a height of around 40 nautical miles at a speed of almost 8,000 feet per second. At that point, they cut out and were jettisoned. It was in April 2012 that Bezos announced that, using sonar equipment, his expedition had found parts of some F1 engines. They were 14,000 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic, some 400 miles off Cape Canaveral on the Florida coast. At the time, Bezos seemed certain that he'd found the Apollo 11 engines, but the only way to be sure would be to raise them from the ocean's depths. And raising at least one of the engines from the ocean floor was exactly what Bezos planned to do. This was anything but an easy task. On the Bezos Expeditions blog, he wrote, "We don't know yet what condition these engines might be in. They hit the ocean at high velocity and have been in salt water for more than 40 years. On the other hand, they're made of tough stuff, so we'll see." Working with his Bezos Expeditions outfit, Bezos now hired the Seabed Worker, a specialist underwater exploration ship built in 2009 and equipped with state-of-the-art gear. Bezos and his crew of mariners and scientists subsequently set off from Cape Canaveral aboard the Seabed Worker at the end of February 2013, and they had high hopes of success. On March 20th, 2013, Bezos made a stunning announcement on his blog. He described how the remotely operated vehicles launched from the Seabed Worker had plunged down to a depth of 14,000 feet. And on the ocean floor, they'd found an incredible sculpture garden of twisted F1 engines that tells the story of a fiery and violent end, one that serves testament to the Apollo program. Indeed, Bezos' excitement at what the team had found was palpable. "We photographed many beautiful objects in situ and have now recovered many prime pieces," he wrote. "And not only have they observed the remains of these Apollo engines, but they've also managed to successfully salvage a selection of artifacts. Each piece we bring on deck conjures for me the thousands of engineers who worked together back then to do what, for all time, had been thought surely impossible," Bezos wrote. And the team had recovered enough parts to reconstruct 2 engines. But a key question remained unanswered. Were these actually the engines from Apollo 11? There was no doubt that they were Apollo mission engines. However, the damage that the engines had sustained when plunging into the ocean and the subsequent seawater corrosion had made it impossible to identify serial numbers. The only hope was that careful restoration work would reveal the true identities of the rocket engines. So once the seabed worker team were back on dry land, they delivered the artifacts that they've hoisted from the ocean floor into the hands of conservators at the Kansas Cosmosphere. Then on July 19, 2013, the day before the 44th anniversary of Apollo 11's lunar module moon landing, Bezos wrote another blog entry. He related how a conservator had used special equipment to scan one of the F1 engine's thrust chambers. The conservator had spotted the number 2044 marked in black paint. That's a manufacturer's code corresponding to NASA serial number 6044. And NASA serial number 6044 was given to Apollo 11's F1 engine number 5. Here at last was definite confirmation of the identity of some of the artifacts that Bezos and his team had found at the bottom of the sea. They were indeed parts of one of the engines that had powered Armstrong and his crew to the moon back in 1969. So a dream had come true for that 5-year-old boy who'd watched the Apollo 11 mission back in 1969. Now the richest man in the world, worth $112 billion in March of 2018, according to Forbes, Bezos had found and retrieved some of the most important pieces of engineering in the history of spaceflight.